wanted to put together a program that documented the performance of Schaeffer products and to show that not only is it going to extend the life of anything that you put it in, but that when conditions become worse than normal, the Schaeffer is going to provide protection like nothing else that I've ever seen. I think too, one of the differences is every now and then we'll hear a story about something that sounds pretty incredible, but when you can see a pattern of performance where something stands out from other products, then I think it's worth mentioning. So the first place we're going to go is a job site, construction industry. This is a piece of machinery that I own myself, and it's a pretty extreme situation. It's a machine called a rock saw. It's got a wheel on the back of it about 8 feet tall, and you'll put 3 or 4 feet of it in solid limestone. You pull the throttle wide open and stand there sometimes for 3-4 hours at a time. You can't sit on the machine often because it'll shake you off, and the dirt and the dust is so bad around it you can't hardly breathe the air. So Schaeffer products have been performing in this machine for many years and beyond the average oil, and you're going to see why in the demonstration here in the video. So let's go out to the job site and see how Schaeffer's doing in the rock saw. There's 3 things that I'd like for you to pay attention to as you see this rock saw operating, and again, this is a pretty extreme situation. It's very hot, a lot of abuse and pounding, vibration. But the first thing is that Schaeffer, with the oil analysis program, has doubled the drain intervals of this piece of machinery. So first of all, it's already just plain cheaper to use Schaeffer oil. And I also have peace of mind of knowing the condition of this engine. The second thing to look at is the hydraulic system. This is a completely hydrostatic machine. It runs off of hydraulic pressure. The temperatures would obviously get very extreme. Now with Schaeffer oil, you can actually put your hands on the hydraulic hoses and the hydraulic motor as it's spinning this wheel and sawing rock while it's working. The third thing is the gearbox. There's a planetary gearbox that spins the wheel. It had gotten so hot before I had Schaeffer oil in it, which of course I bought this machine used. I don't know what kind of lubricant was in it before, but it actually discolored the paint on the gearbox. It had gotten so hot. So now with Schaeffer oil, you can actually put your hand on the gearbox while it's operating, so it's providing far more protection by eliminating the friction. The next place that we're going to is a young man that has a pulling tractor, and again, these are situations where a lot more is asked of the piece of equipment than it was designed to do. So even when it's in a racing situation, that's extreme by itself. But then when something goes wrong and the lubricant still provides protection beyond what could be expected of it, it's really noteworthy. So we're going to see David Holbrook and a tractor called Red Rage.
Bill came by one day with the friction machine and the lubricant seemed real impressive. So having a pulling tractor and them making a high performance oil, I chose to try the high performance oil, and luckily that I did. This particular tractor, I have an external oil pump which is driven by a belt. And one night, about halfway down the track, this is what the belt looks like. And this is what happened halfway down the track one night. It completely destroyed the belt, lost all oil pressure, and wide open. By the time I seen it, I've got lights that come on to tell me no oil pressure. Well, I went to grabbing levers and shutting it down quick as I could, thinking that I'm gonna have to come back, completely redo the engine. Well, I came back, pulled the oil pan off of it, pulled all the bearings out of it, and to my surprise, the crank was perfect, no damage whatsoever. So therefore, I feel like the moly in this particular oil is great. That is what saved the crank in my engine.
We're now going to travel to Cookeville, Tennessee, to a machine shop where a man builds race engines, and he's been using Schaeffer for several years and has documented this, as I say, a pattern of performance to really show some dramatic differences between Schaeffer moly lubricants and other oils. So he's got many situations that we could see, so let's take a trip to Cookeville.
I have found through a little bit of testing that Schaeffer oil allows me to put a little credibility in my name as far as my engine building is. Schaeffer oil has given me some insurance, more or less, is what I can say. The product is awesome. This is a little 383 Chevy. The crankshaft itself is what I want to talk about. This motor was ran probably about 20 races. And what had happened, it had stock caps on it, as it does presently. It busted 3 caps under a feature race at one of the local dirt tracks. And when it did, it lost oil pressure. Bringing the motor back into the shop here, we tore it down, and we had found that even though it had lost oil pressure, the crankshaft was not damaged. The crankshaft now, the owner of this motor was able to save this crankshaft and put it in another block. So in other words, the only thing that the customer has to replace was a block. So it really saved the customer quite a bit here. This particular crankshaft here was $880. This is a Cali's steel 4340 375 stroke crank. Not a high dollar crank, but yet for a budget racer, it's a high dollar crankshaft. This is out of a dry sump motor, 421 cubic inch small block Chevy. This motor ran 8 or 9 races, I'm not exactly sure how many, but during the feature on a half-mile dirt track at 8,400 RPM, the dry sump belt broke. And when the belt broke, of course, he lost all the oil pressure. By the time he got it shut down, he had figured he really did total damage to the motor. After bringing the motor in and tearing it down, we noticed, and you can see here, the bluing of the crankshaft. And we know that anytime metal gets, forged steel gets above 550 degrees, it starts bluing. So this crankshaft obviously was above 550 degrees. Well, when we tore it down and checked the crankshaft for straightness and roundness, we found that the crankshaft was ready to go back into the vehicle. It was amazing. I saved the bearings, and this particular motor was fed from the rear to the front. And the worst bearings in this particular application was the front. Now these are coated bearings running Schaeffer's oil. This motor was turning 8,400 RPM and lost all oil pressure. You can see these bearings absolutely are in great shape for what they went through. You can see here that the crankshaft turned blue, but yet the bearings are fine. Amazing. Same thing, these particular rods came off of this motor. These rods, we torqued them and checked them for straightness using the existing bolt. The rods were still straight even though the rod bolts are shot because of the heat. This motor was a 375 stroke SB2 motor. This motor run all season. The motor now is going to be rebuilt, but we pulled these pistons out, and I just wanted to show this was not a coated piston. We normally coat our pistons, but being a budget racer, once again, we didn't coat these pistons, but yet the wear on this piston is very minimal. We will reuse these pistons and just have to replace the rings. This oil is saving our customers tremendous amount of dollars. Tremendous amount of dollars. What we do is, of course, all your engine builders know that what we do is we mic bearings. Say, for instance, this would be number 1 in the motor going together, and this would be number 1 here. What we'd do, we would mic this radius, we would transfer it to an outside, and we would stick it in here like this, and we would check to get the clearance that we need for any particular application. Well, we noticed when we tore this motor down here, it lost its belt. During teardown and inspection of teardown, we could still observe the mark that we put in this coated bearing during teardown. We were absolutely astonished. Once again, this was 8,400 RPM and 0 oil pressure. The only thing that saved this motor was the Schaeffer's oil due to it has ball bearings in it. It has to have, that's the only answer we can come up with. Last night we was at the races, and one of a potential customer come up to me, and he had noticed that our car was running pretty good, and he had heard what motor was in, and he asked me how much I had in my motor. And I told him very little, and he couldn't believe it. It's a 421 cubic inch SB2 motor, and it has $325 rods in it, $550 crankshaft in it. We're turning at 8,400 RPM, and it's surviving. And he asked me, how do you get your engines to do that? And I real simple told him, coated bearings, Schaeffer's oil, and proper clearance, and they'll live. And that has been working for us. Now here's another crankshaft. I want to show it. This is a higher dollar crankshaft. This is a Crowler, $1,700 lightweight crankshaft, 3/4 stroke, little short stroke crank. This crankshaft ran all season. This crankshaft's never been polished. All it was come out of the motor, put in the washer, and brought back here to my office. This engine will go back into the same block. I'll refit bearings and never touch it. Once again, Schaeffer's oil. I mean, you can look at this crankshaft. It's got watermarks on it where it went through the washer, but this crank is astounding. But it has nothing but Schaeffer's oil on it. And Schaeffer's oil has done that for that gentleman right there.
Now this is just a few examples of the pattern that I'm seeing so very often about what happens with Schaeffer oil. We just chose a few individuals, a few people that have seen and been able to document the difference in Schaeffer. So Schaeffer has developed a recipe with their lubricant that really seems to stand alone. And it's pretty amazing to where you could almost predict at times what's going to happen with a piece of machinery as far as lowering the temperature of it or changing perhaps the way the machine operates, because you have confidence in the ability of this lubricant to make a difference. So it will save anybody money by using Schaeffer products, because you're going to extend the life of the equipment, you're going to extend the drain intervals, you're going to have protection, which is some of the cheapest insurance you could get, that when something goes wrong, you're not going to have such disastrous results as you would with most other conventional oils. So I really feel that Schaeffer is probably the best deal going on as far as lubricants is concerned. And that's why I'm confident to be able to put aside the excavation business and go to work for Schaeffer Oil. I'm very confident that I can offer it to my friends, realizing that it's going to perform for them as it has for me and these other people that we've seen in this video.
It'll be in this particular pulling tractor as long as I own it.
Schaeffer Oil allows me to put a little credibility in my name as far as my engine building is.